So let's start with Creighton Hooker and Dave Benbow. Could you give us a sense of what brought you to Korea in the 1960s, 70s, and what the DMZ was like back then? And we'll start with Creighton.
Sure. Well, thank you very much, Mike. It's a pleasure to be here. And just to give you some background, I arrived in Korea in 1968. And I think what caused me to go to Korea was a dramatic increase in the number of North Korean hostile actions, particularly ambushes, but also the scope, the scale of the attacks were becoming more and more significant. The Blue House raid is a prime example. The USS Pueblo capture, second example, and there are others. Bombing of US troop barracks. So the North Koreans were really getting very, very active and aggressive. As an infantry officer in 1968, I fully expected to be deployed to Vietnam. I got a letter from the 2nd Infantry Division after I got my orders to Korea. I thought I'd gotten very lucky because it looked like I was going to Korea rather than Vietnam. And I got a really wonderful letter from the 2nd Infantry Division saying that make sure I bought my dress blues because they had a lot of social activities and they had plenty of athletic equipment, tennis rackets, and so on, but I make sure that I should have my golf clubs shipped over when I could. So I thought I really had gotten lucky and was going to just have a really nice tour in Korea. And so I'm processing in at the 2nd Division headquarters, and I asked the NCO who was processing me in, where should I have my golf clubs sent? And the NCO said, sir, you're going to the DMZ, and we had 2 guys killed there last week. So I didn't know what I was getting into, but I learned very quickly that it was anything but an easy tour. The DMZ itself was really very much a paradox for me. The fact that it was absolutely beautiful, pristine, thick woods, very lush vegetation, streams and rivers running through it, lots and lots of wildlife. So it was actually just a beautiful, looked very peaceful from a distance, but in fact, it was extremely dangerous. The terrain made ambushes very, very easy for the North Koreans to do. There was a lot of unexploded ordnance from the Korean War still in the zone. There were minefields, there were fighting positions where we could walk up and find pineapple grenades and M1 ammo clips from 1953, still where they'd been left when the troops departed. By far and away, though, the biggest danger was the North Korean soldiers. The terrain and the dense vegetation made it very, very easy for them to hide and to ambush units. They were particularly good troops in that they were experts at camouflage, and they also had developed sort of hiding places, almost like spider holes, where I'm sure we walked by multiple North Korean units, small units, and never knew they were there. They were extremely, extremely good troops. They didn't really want to engage American forces unless they actually had the upper hand. So we rarely went out with, broke our units down into less than 10 men. Occasionally we'd go down to 5, but that was asking for trouble. One of the more dangerous things actually was walking the military demarcation line. Part of our job was occasionally to walk right down the MDL to make sure all the markers were standing and to report any that were down. As we'd walk along the MDL, the North Korean troops would come out of their bunkers and they'd yell at us, insults. I found out later from talking to the Katusas, they were often insults, telling us to go home. And occasionally the North Koreans would just take a shot at us. So it was a pretty unpleasant time, but as I say, a major paradox. And so that's my sort of feeling about it. And I'll pass it over to David.
Thanks, great. David?
Thank you very much. I was sent to Korea in February of '68, right after the Pueblo had been captured in the Blue House raid. I finished 5 of my 8-week advanced infantry training course at Fort Dix, and we were called together and said, boys, your training's over, you're going to Korea. A lot of the guys started high-fiving saying, yeah, we dodged Vietnam. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, why are we going to Korea so quickly? And I found out. I'm going to summarize, since I was a Sergeant E5, I went over there a slick sleeve private, came out a Sergeant E5, but I'm going to summarize the danger that I was personally aware of. July 30th, 1968, my platoon, 3rd Platoon, was in a night ambush patrol. Firefight broke out. Michael Remarchuk from Philadelphia was killed. Earl Jeffrey from Oklahoma was shot in the face and the chest. Cleveland Davis was shot in the foot. A Catoosa named I.S. was shot in the foot. Earl was sent home and we never heard from him again. I had been on patrol with those guys at 3 prior patrols, and that night I was in a foxhole along the barrier fence watching the red and green tracers going off and hearing the booms off in the distance. It was a terrible night. Sometime in August, within a week or two, Catoosa was killed in the Korean DMZ, and I'm very embarrassed and ashamed, but I cannot remember his name. I shared a foxhole with him several weeks prior, and I was trying to teach him English, and he was trying to teach me Korean, and I just can't remember his name, but he was also killed in the DMZ, also 3rd Platoon. In September 27th of 68, 2 men, signalmen, were doing wiring up to guard post Gladys, our guard post. They were ambushed in their Jeep, and Joseph Kayer and Mike Reynolds were killed. In fact, Creighton Hooker was on patrol when that happened, and he was the first to get to them. They were already dead. Also, in the summer to fall of 68, Reese Weathers was wounded. I was on OP Maisie that night, and Reese was wounded in the head with a grenade shrapnel. Of the 16 months that I was there, those are the firefights that I'm aware of. There were others that I was not that involved with. Of course, keep in mind, we were in foxholes that had been defoliated by, I later learned in 1993, Agent Orange. Guard post Gladys was void of vegetation. And then the worst loss of life was March the 15th of 1969, when B Company was out walking the line, like Creighton Hooker had just said. Creighton was, by the way, Creighton was an outstanding officer. I was in his company. It was a privilege to serve with him. And B Company was ambushed. A troop was killed, and 3 were wounded, and it took a while to get them out of the DMZ because the North Koreans had the firepower on them and had the advantage. Finally got them out of the DMZ. There was a medevac waiting for them. It started snowing. The 3 wounded were loaded into the medevac. It went up, came straight down, blew up, and killed everybody. The doctor, the medic, the crew members, and the 3 wounded. So yes, the DMZ was a dangerous place.
Thanks, Dave. When I served in the DMZ in 1987, things were much more routine. Of the 42nd Division soldiers that were killed since the armistice, 39 of them were killed during the period of the late 60s when Creighton and Dave were there. At the time they were there, the 2nd Division sector of the DMZ was 18 miles long. And to guard that portion of the DMZ, the division had an entire regimental combat team from the Rock Army attached to it, or under the operational control of it, as well as a brigade headquarters from the U.S. 7th Division and a rotating infantry battalion from the 7th Division that rotated up every 4 months or so. By the time I got there, the division had a sector of less than 1 mile, and that was guarded by one of the 5 infantry battalions in the 2ID at that time. Each battalion rotated up to the DMZ for about a 10-week period to perform DMZ duty. One rifle company of the battalion normally manned 2 platoon strength guard posts, as well as some smaller posts along the south barrier fence. Another rifle company served as a quick reaction force. And a third rifle company conducted ambush and reconnaissance patrols, as General Brooks mentioned earlier. The heavy mortar company, the combat support company, was occupied a small fire base inside Camp Liberty Bell, which was right next to the DMZ. And the scout platoon and anti-tank platoons conducted mounted and dismounted patrols. During the 10 weeks on the DMZ, my company conducted about 180 patrols, recons, ambushes, and mounted patrols. There were no firefights or enemy contact.